I'm going to a couple minutes as people start to filter in. Okay, I'm going to kick off. Hello, welcome everyone. I am Mimi Hicklin. I'm the program coordinator at the Charter for Compassion, and I am so happy to be here with you all today and to share with you one of our charter partner gems. Our webinar is with Anita Nowak. Anita Nowak is singularly focused on leveraging empathy for personal, organizational, and planetary transformation. A Montreal native, Anita holds a PhD from McGill University, where she teaches leadership and social entrepreneurship and innovation, and was named Professor of the Year in 2014 and 2019. She is a certified personal and professional coach and co-founder of the PVM Studio, a global advisory firm for purpose-driven family offices, foundations, and companies. She is a two-time TEDx speaker, hosts a podcast and YouTube series called Purposeful Empathy, and is currently completing her first book by the same name. You can learn more by visiting www.anitanowak.com. I am eager to hand this over to Anita, but first I do want to take care of some brief housekeeping items on our end. This webinar is being recorded, so everyone who registered will receive a copy of that recording after the session, and we'll also put it up on the Charter for Compassion website. The chat box is open, so we would invite you, as Anita gives her presentation, to put any comments or questions you may have in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end to respond to those. The chat box is, if you hover your mouse over the lower bar on Zoom, there's a little chat icon and you click that, it opens right up. The Charter does regularly offer webinars like this one from our partners, our sectors. The cat came across the screen. Our partners, our sectors, and our communities. Visit www.charterforcompassion.org to view our events calendar, sign up for our newsletters, and stay in the know. And I think that's it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Anita.
Oh, thank you so much, Mimi. And thank you to everyone who's joining live or who's going to be watching later. I'm so delighted to be doing this webinar with the Charter of Compassion. I'm a huge fan of the work that everyone who is part of this community is doing. And I got super inspired by Karen's message when I was doing my PhD on empathy, when I saw her speak on the TEDx stage, and imagine, like, she was a heartthrob to me. I had a girl crush on her so much, and I happened to be in Harvard Square, and she was in a coffee shop. And I looked and I was like, is that Karen Armstrong? And I went over, not for an autograph, but I just wanted to just tell her how much I appreciated her. And she had time and she said, would you like to sit down? So it was just a highlight of my life to spend, like 40 minutes chatting with someone I see as a personal hero. So this really means a lot to me, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So what I'd like to do is just to acknowledge, even though some of you are on the West Coast of North America, I'm originally from Montreal. I'm actually physically in Tbilisi, Georgia at the moment. So it's the evening for me. And I want to begin by acknowledging that my work usually takes place on the unceded territory of Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations. I'd like to recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters, and I'm grateful to the many generations who have stewarded them. I also support any effort to sustain a relationship with Indigenous peoples based on respect, dignity, trust, cooperation, and of course, empathy in the process of advancing truth, reconciliation, and justice. And this is an important message, I think, for Canadians of late, especially since we have been through a big day of reckoning, several days of reckoning around the bodies of children in Kamloops having been discovered recently. So wanted to start from that place. I'm going to share my screen now. And we've got about, I don't know, somewhere around 40 minutes of presentation. It's a very, very slide heavy deck, lots of images to look at. But feel free to ask questions in the chat box, especially for clarification. But I'm really hoping there'll be like 15, 20 minutes of time at the end for us to have a dialogue. I'm very excited to share with you. So the talk was called Making Purposeful Empathy Our Superpower, but I'm adding here this little subtitle of For a Better Life and for a Better World. And so the principal thing that I want to show through this webinar is a model I've been working on of purposeful empathy that I think is actually very useful for the workplace. It's a model that can be used in communities. So I'm thinking like charter communities, compassion cities, compassionate communities, within your own family, and certainly as a person. So the model has applicability across a bunch of different contexts, and I hope it's useful to you. So I'm going to start with a story. Some years ago, I was sitting in the audience of a major conference on the prevention of genocide hosted by my university, Yale. And we were about 1,000 people in the audience, and there were a number of speakers that made up a panel of survivors of genocide from different genocides. It's a terrible sentence to say out loud, you know, several genocides, imagine. And one woman, Esther Mujawayo, who is the woman that you see in the middle of this picture, stood up and put a big photograph on a big jumbo screen of a family gathering, which had about 60 people in it for a birthday or an anniversary. And she told the audience that of all the people who are in the picture, only she and one of her daughters survived. And it was really a moment where you could hear a pin drop in the audience. And she went on to say that a lot of people, especially in the West, have told her, if only I'd known that genocide was happening, I would have done something about it. And her response to that is, I just don't buy that. Because right now there are people suffering in the world. Maybe it's not a genocide, but there's poverty and malnutrition and disease and civil strife. You know, you continue to fail us. And I felt, it's the only time in my life that I literally felt my ears burning. Like I felt the sensation of my ears burning, and I thought she was talking directly to me. And I made a decision that I would do something, and that I would not continue to fail the Rwandans. So I actually went with my sister and spent part of a summer in 2008 in Kigali, Rwanda, where I was working as a volunteer for an organization called Tubahumurize, with genocide survivors, women who survived the worst of ordeals, as you can imagine, and are still living with very difficult lives in poverty. Many of them were sick. They lost family members. Some adopted orphans. So it was an incredible trip on many, many, many levels, like a soul kind of life-altering type of trip. And I fell in love with Rwanda. We traveled around, we saw the beauty of the country and the beauty of the people, despite what they had lived through. And of course, I saw really tough poverty. And of course, you don't go to Rwanda without visiting the memorial. And just to offer a little trigger warning here, you know, we heard stories from survivors, many of whom were part of that women's group that I worked with, but even strangers on buses would open up and share. They wanted to tell the story, and they wanted, you know, Westerners or other people, visitors, to know what happened to them and their families. And I heard one story that well, my sister and I heard it together, and we couldn't speak for nearly a day afterwards. We were just so shocked by the story. A man had witnessed his own children die at the hand of genocidaires, and his wife as well, and he managed to escape. And he ran, you know, 20 kilometers, so maybe, you know, I don't know what that is in miles, but 15, 20 miles, to a friend's home who took him in and open up the floorboards of their kitchen, under their kitchen table, to create a space for him to hide. And he was protected that way for nearly 2 months. And, you know, you can't hear a story like that and think, you know, what is wrong with humanity, that we could do that, like, you know, the neighbors could turn it on neighbors in a genocide. And then also, what could allow somebody to step up with such great courage at great family personal peril to save someone else's life? And this is a question that's been asked, you know, by philosophers and sociologists and psychologists. What is it about human beings that could bring out the best and the worst in us? And primatologists have studied human nature as well. So, you know, for many, many years, primatologists have studied chimpanzees to inform us about what human nature is all about. And they've looked at chimp culture, that they're prone to violence, and they have a very hierarchical kind of clan structure, and so they're combative and violent by nature. But Frans de Waal, who is a Dutch primatologist, has studied bonobos and says, you know, if we'd spent the last 50 years looking at bonobo culture, we would have a totally different conception of what it means to be human. So not chimpanzees, rather, bonobos are loving and tender by nature, and cooperative and collaborative by nature. In fact, when clans have disagreements, they actually have orgies. They make love, not war, quite literally, as a way of kind of finding peace again in the clan. So you can see through these images that we have some of the chimpanzee qualities in us, but we also have some of the bonobo qualities in us. And I found it super fascinating when I started learning about this, that human beings have more DNA in common with chimps and more DNA in common with bonobos than they have with each other. I just found that so fascinating when I learned that. And of course, people who have studied the evolution of Homo sapiens have looked at our trajectory. And, you know, some 20, 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were not the only large brain species on the planet. Apparently, there were about 4 or 5 other large brain species. And we are the ones who survived and thrived. And evolutionary scientists attribute our capacity to empathize and be compassionate with one another as the reason for our survival. Because if we were not kind and generous and collaborative with one another, we would be ostracized, and that essentially meant to be left to die. And we also sort of, as a way of reading each other and understanding each other, we're the ones that develop the biggest whites of our eyes. We lost our facial hairs for the most part so that we could read each other's facial expressions. So there's just a whole bunch of physiological things that evolved with us as a result of our desire to understand each other and be compassionate and empathize. So I love that. So let's start at a baseline question of what is empathy. Maybe this is something that comes to mind when you think of empathy, or, you know, on a more levity basis, maybe that's it. Or given the year that we've had, maybe this is a sort of the first thing that comes to mind when we think of empathy. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll just invite, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, just in a sentence, like, what is empathy to you? What does empathy mean? What's the definition of empathy? And Mimi, you know, as you see a couple of answers come through, if you wouldn't mind reading them out, that would be great.
James says that empathy is to feel others' pain. Marilyn, empathy is feeling with another. Alice says empathy is the capability to feel another living being. And Sue says that understanding others.
Beautiful.
Laura says
beautiful.
that connecting on a deep level with other people.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, well, thank you for that engagement. There'll be other opportunities for you to engage as we go, and I love when audience members do. So typically when I ask that question, it gets broken down into three kind of answers. So stepping into someone else's shoes, seeing through someone else's eyes, or feeling what someone else is feeling. And those are all perfectly valid explanations or definitions of what it means to empathize. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 6 things that I think are worth knowing about empathy based on sort of my 10 years or so studying the topic. So the first thing is that I put them on this continuum where pity is on one side, followed closely by sympathy, and empathy is on the other. Now, sometimes these words are used as synonyms, but they don't mean the same thing. When you pity someone, there's a power asymmetry embedded in the relationship. You look down on the person, oh, you poor person, right? And there's a lot of, paternalistic pity paradigms out there, right? Foreign aid, philanthropy can sometimes be predicated on, like, oh, poor person, right? And that's not helpful. But as you make your way across the continuum and you get to empathy, I think that's where it gets really interesting, because in my definition of empathy, it's where we recognize that we share a common humanity. So my definition is the innate trait that unites us in our shared humanity, with an important caveat, and that is, of course, to not deny or discount lived experience. So we share this thing called life in common, and there are gateways to understanding because we share life together, but we can never really, 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 really know what someone else is going through because they've had a different set of lived experiences, and that's worth honoring and recognizing. The second thing that I want to share about empathy is that it's made up of 2 kind of phenomena. So one is affective empathy, and that happens to us. Okay, so we feel what someone else is feeling. It happens to our heart. So here's what I like to show to make that point come to life. Okay, in an embodied way. If I were to see all of your faces looking at this beautiful face, your cheekbones would be going up, your smile would be turned up, your eyes would be kind of like in a lighter mood, because you'd be in emotional resonance with this child. You'd be feeling this kind of joy that she's feeling. And then if you were to see this image, it would be really tough, if not impossible, to keep that smile. So your facial expression would just drop. And all of that's happening as a result of your mirror neurons based on the stimulus you're getting. And you're not thinking about it. That's just happening to your body as a result. So in a lot of ways, affective empathy is much like compassion, right? Where you feel what someone else is feeling and you're in this state of resonance with someone. So, a lot of people ask, what about compassion? Well, I think compassion is a lot like affective empathy. The second aspect of empathy that I think is also really important is cognitive empathy. And that is our capacity to imagine what someone else is feeling, or imagine how you might feel in the circumstances that someone else is living. So this requires an imaginative leap of faith. It requires perspective taking. So when someone's telling you a story, you're engaged in cognitive empathy. And when you're reading literature, good fiction, you are engaged in cognitive empathy. So I'll offer another kind of audience participation moment. Here are 3 gorgeous little puppies, and I would invite you to choose one. Okay, so choose the little guy on the left, the middle, or the right. And I want you to sort of like look at this puppy's facial expression, body language, what their eyes might be communicating. And then think about what they would say in one sentence if they were able to speak. And maybe I'll just invite you to choose one of the 3 puppies, left, center, or right. And I'm still asking everybody in the audience to, you're looking at your puppy, you're trying to decide what your puppy would say in one little sentence. And Mimi, if you could choose one now, please.
Okay, I've chosen the middle one.
Perfect. So anybody who's chosen the middle one, if you wouldn't mind either typing in your sentence into the chat box, or if you feel like it, please unmute yourself if that's an option, and just share what you thought that puppy was saying or would say.
We've got 2 people saying, "What's going on over there? Hey, what's that?"
Nice. Is there anybody else who chose the puppy in the middle?
This one says, "Curious puppy."
Wow, that's so fascinating. So is there anybody else? I'll call on, I'll maybe take 10 more seconds in case there's anybody else who chose puppy in the center. Okay, so you know what's interesting is that when I do this exercise, typically 3 people or 4 people will offer their answer, and they're always different. So there must be something about like some resonance on this call, because you've all kind of identified this like what's going on curiosity thing. But often what happens is somebody will say, I miss my mom, or I'm hungry, or I'm lonely. And so what ends up happening is that even though you're looking at the same puppy and you're all intelligent people, you might interpret their facial expression and their body language differently. So the point that gets made as a result of that exercise is that even though we all have the capacity to imagine what someone else is feeling, we might not get it right. And so cognitive empathy is not a perfect science, but it is something that you can develop. And I'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so the third thing to know about empathy, or that I think is worth knowing about empathy, is that we're all born with it. There are a couple of exceptions. Some researchers would look at people who are on the spectrum as atypical empathizers. So we won't talk about those individuals, and we won't talk about psychopaths and narcissists, who are the other outliers. But generally speaking, most people are born with the capacity to empathize, and they develop their capacity to empathize at various milestones of life and throughout life. And you can continue to become a more empathic person at any point in your life, including all the way till the golden years of your life. And as an empathy researcher, I'll just share with you as an anecdote, when my daughter, who's now 5, was 3 months old, I took her out for a walk. It was a beautiful summer day, and she was in the stroller and was in a just perfectly happy mood. And we walked by another mom who had a child in a stroller, and her son was having a full-blown meltdown, crying, 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 crying. And as we, walked past each other, my daughter sat up, or acknowledged this other child, heard this other child, became conscious of this other child wailing, and burst spontaneously into tears. And I was delighted, because the 3-month mark is when something called emotional contagion kicks in babies, and I thought, oh, just right on time. Please don't judge me for that, but it really does happen that there are milestones to hit as you develop. And what's really great about empathy in our brain is that as we go to the gym and pump our bicep muscles doing curls, we can become more empathic with practice. And that's thanks to our mirror neuron network. So, when we're born, the density of our neural connections is very, there's hardly any density. It's very sparse in there, right? Because we haven't had many experiences. And that's why that first 0 to 1 or 0 to 3, or some people say 0 to 5, but definitely the 0 to 3 years is when the brain goes through the most change, and the synaptic connections and the neural connections are growing fast and furious, and these neural like clusters form based on repeated experiences. And so if you think about it, when you're born into a family that has a lot of let's say fighting or arguing, or a child would be shamed or spoken to in kind of harsh ways, their brain and neural connections will develop differently than a child who is raised in a family where there's loving kindness and tenderness and modeling of compassion and empathy. But what I love about our brain is that just because of the circumstances we were born into and have lived doesn't determine who we are and how empathic we can be. Because we have something called neuroplasticity or brain plasticity, we can actually change the neural connections in our brain, either by thinking more empathic thoughts or behaving in more empathic ways. And I find that super hopeful. When I learned that, I started doing all sorts of experiments. And so I'll share another anecdote. This would be in the year, I want to say like, I don't know, 2009, 2000, and yeah, maybe 2009, 2010. So before social media, before mobile phones were a real thing and you couldn't be distracted in a long lineup, here I was at a FedEx in the month of December when everybody's sending packages during the holiday season. And it took 30 minutes. I was bored out of my mind. Everybody was bored. Everybody was annoyed. And I got up to the counter, and the person who was ready to take my package was really unfriendly. Like, it would be an understatement to say that she was unfriendly. She was just really nasty. And immediately, kind of my customer always right kind of attitude, like, oh, well, is this how you're going to treat me? Let me speak to your manager. Like, that kind of response came to me. And then I decided that I would experiment. And so I took a moment to pause, and I looked at her and asked, "Are you okay?" And there was just this little pregnant pause moment in response where she was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. And when she realized I wasn't, she just burst into tears. And she told me, she says, "I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks. My son's at home with a fever. I think I'm coming down with something. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't had a lunch break. I'm exhausted." And she just, she shed her tears. I remember we talked for a few minutes. I got her a mint tea, and it was just one of those occasions where her full humanity showed up, just thanks to a little compassionate action, a little empathic action. And so, as a result of the experiments that I did, I found myself enjoying being a more empathic person. And, I sought ways to be more empathic. And I was one of those kids that grew up in a family where there was lots of yelling and lots of judgment. And so I'm sure my brain was developed in defensive ways. But I think over time, as I've practiced more empathy, I've become a more empathic person, and my brain has changed as well. So I find that hopeful. So one of the ways to become a more empathic person is through the gateway of gratitude. It turns out that our brains can't be in a state of stress and anxiety at the same time as a state of gratitude. And it's not possible to empathize when you're stressed out and you're anxious. So one of the best ways to become empathic is via gratitude. So if you're feeling yourself stressed out and you're feeling yourself anxious about things, and this has been a year of all of that, it's really helpful to do gratitude exercises, just to think about things that you're grateful for and take a pause to just bring that positive energy to you, because that opens up pathways for empathy to be possible. So with that in mind, what I would invite you to do is, let's take a moment together and just in the chat box again, write something you're grateful for. Could be small, could be big, could be in between. And maybe when reading them out, I would really appreciate it.
Lynn is grateful for being alive. Laura and Camille are both grateful for their families. Alice is grateful for her experiences.
Beautiful. Now, what happens is I often do an exercise in my classrooms where I've got like 50 or 60 students. Before we do this gratitude moment, I'll invite them to close their eyes and do a body scan and sort of figure out if they have any crinks in their neck, if they have a headache, if they're tired, just scan how their body's feeling. And then we'll go one by one for each person in the class to share something that they're grateful for. And at the end of it all, we'll do another body scan. And inevitably what happens is the entire consciousness of the class has changed and has been elevated, right? So our bodies, when we're in a state of gratitude, we're actually, our heart rate stabilize and our immune system functions better, and our breathing becomes less shallow and it becomes more deep. So all sorts of personal bodily changes happen when we're in a state of gratitude. So it's a good practice, and thanks for sharing. So the fifth thing to know about empathy is that it's good for us. When we are in an empathic embrace with someone else, our bodies are in a state of resonance, much like a state of gratitude, and all sorts of feel-good hormones like oxytocin and serotonin go up, and that helps us in terms of how we feel. It greases the wheels of our relationship. Trust and belonging starts to feel really like you feel like you're in safe places. And the opposite happens too when you're in a state of empathy, is that cortisol shoots down, and cortisol is a stress hormone, which is, you know, a cause of a lot of inflammation, which is also correlated to a heap of physical ailments like migraines and what's it called, diabetes, and so chronic conditions. So it's really good for us to be more empathic, and I love that too. So the sixth and final thing is, okay, so I'll start with a little backstory. You know, this is the machine that landed on Mars a couple of months ago. It's a feat of engineering and physics and math, and I don't know what else. And it's amazing. Human ingenuity is amazing to have developed something that could leave planet Earth, go to Mars, and send us this incredible photograph. And we've cracked the human genome, which is another feat of science, and we are now developing artificial intelligence, for good or bad. But it's like we're remarkable human beings. And at the same time as we're being remarkable human beings out in the world, I believe we're living in the era of a massive collective empathy deficit. And I've got a few little data points to sort of make that case. So you are all aware of this, but this is just sort of like, you know, high level reminder. There's a few people on the planet that live in glorious homes like this, when millions upon millions of people do not. Even in the most advanced, most wealthy countries on the planet. I'm from Canada, some of you are from the US, others are coming in from Europe. You know, even in the most advanced countries, we're still seeing homelessness increase. And why is that? With the human ingenuity that we have, that I just spoke of, how could we let this be happening? Or 1 billion people on the planet lack access to safe drinking water, and 1 billion people practice open defecation. I mean, these are huge health, public health risks. And we're still living in an era of bonded labor and modern day slavery. There's 100,000 children that are working in slave type conditions and working as child soldiers. And, you know, the 27 million people is the estimate of the International Labor Organization. That's 3 times the number of people that were exploited and abused over the 300-year African slave trade. So that's happening on our time. So we're not, I don't think, optimizing how we are living on this planet and deploying our ingenuity to the best benefit of all. And then, of course, there's this happening, right? So we're polluting our waters and our air, and we're clear cutting, and our biodiversity and conservation loss, you know, the losses are just astronomical. And we're living through floods and fires and droughts and storms. And who's paying the price? The people that caused the problem the least, like contributed the least to the problem, and have the smallest, if not anything, like means to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So that's what I mean by this massive collective empathy deficit that we're living through. And that's at sort of at global scale, right? But when you think about us as people, as individual people, over the last few decades, there's been a rise in anxiety and depression, in self-harm and in suicide. And COVID has only made it worse, in particular for women. So we are organizing society in a way that we're not sharing our resources well. We're not using our ingenuity to solve the social problems. Instead, we're, you know, designing the latest lipstick or whatever. And we're paying the price personally. So I believe the world needs more empathy, and we need more empathy. And so the bonus number 7 is we need more purposeful empathy, empathy on purpose. So the title of the talk was Making Purposeful Empathy Our Superpower for a Better Life and a Better World. And I'm now going to move into the model of purposeful empathy, and then happy to answer questions. Mimi, can I just ask, are there any questions that have come along in the chat box as I've been talking?
Lynn Harris asks, what tools or practices can you recommend to help us develop our empathy muscles?
So there's one that's known as the metta meditation, where it's a loving kindness meditation, and you spend a couple of minutes thinking about the people that you love, and you send them really positive thoughts. I wish you a pleasant day. I wish you a peaceful day. I wish you a healthy day. I'm sending all my love to you. And then after a couple of minutes thinking about that group, you think about a group of people you really like. So maybe your neighbors or your colleagues or friends you went to high school with, and you do the same thing. You send them loving kindness. And then after a couple of minutes, you think about a third group, and that would be all the people you don't know, so you have no relationship with, but you know exist. So maybe somebody who sorted the mail at the headquarters of the mail station, or the farmer that cut down the wheat that was in your bread that you ate, or the fisherman, and you send them loving kindness, or the dental assistant that lives in Nova Scotia that you'll never meet. And then the hard part, and the last group that you want to send loving kindness to, are the people that you disagree with or who have hurt you and wronged you, and you send them loving kindness. And that's tough to do, especially in our very highly politicized, politically divided world. But you send them loving kindness, and the practice of developing the capacity to send loving kindness kind of helps you recognize that we're all on this journey together as human beings, and that while you may disagree and they may have hurt you, they are human, and you are activating your empathy muscles and your compassion muscles by sending them loving kindness, despite whatever history you have. So I hopefully that answers Lynn's question. Shall I carry on, or was there another question?
Carry on.
All right. So, I'm going to emphasize the for a better life first, by talking about a couple of models that already exist in the world. So you're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs if you've taken like an intro to psych class. It basically says that once your basic needs are met, then it's your next level order of needs that need to be met until you achieve what's known as self-actualization. So the need to achieve your full potential. And that's a model where you live your best life if you're fully self-actualized. Another model that is very popular is the Ikigai out of Japan, the same island that introduced karate to the world. And incidentally, the same island that has the highest proportion of centenarians, so people over 100 years old in the world. The highest concentration lives on that island, and they developed the Ikigai. And so the question there, there's 4 questions that need to be answered. And if you can answer those 4 questions with the same answer, then you're living a life of Ikigai. So what do you love? What are you good at? What can you get paid for? And what does the world need? And I remember when I did this for the first time, I realized that teaching was my Ikigai, which made a lot of sense. I love to teach. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting model. So you can live a very happy life if you're in a state of Ikigai or aligned with your Ikigai. So I believe the best way to create a better life is by contributing to a better world. And I'm sure that anyone who ascribes to the charter of compassion would agree. And I'm obviously not the only one who knows this, and I'm certainly not putting myself in company of these luminaries, but many of the greatest humans who have lived on the planet have come to the same conclusion, that living your life in service to others is actually what makes your life meaningful and joyful. So we come back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the end of his life, in work that didn't get published but is starting to get a little bit of attention now, he wrote how wrong he was and said, oh, self-actualization is not actually the pinnacle of achieving our best life. In fact, we live our best life when we're in a state of self-transcendence, which is, being of purpose beyond yourself. So serving a larger purpose or a larger cause. And that's what the model of purposeful empathy is all about. Now, Here's where I start with a set of slides. This looks super busy, so don't get caught up on reading everything because I'm going to break it down one at a time. And as I go through the model, there are 5 questions to ask yourself. And you can ask this of yourself in your own diary. You can do this as a family around the kitchen table. You can do this again, with a community group, maybe a book club, or some other garden group that you're with, or at your organization with your team members. So these questions apply at all different levels of scale. But it starts here, and that is with issues that you care about. So you want to think about the issues that you care about the most, because that will allow for intrinsic self-motivation, right? If it's something that touches you personally, and you don't have to defend why it's an issue you care about. Maybe you grew up with a best friend who had anorexia, or maybe your aunt had breast cancer, or maybe you care about the plastic in the ocean. Doesn't matter what issue you care about. Don't judge or evaluate your issue. Just acknowledge what it is. Identify the issue or issues that you care about the most. So the first question is, what's that? What's the issue that I care most about? Then you think about challenges facing the world. And the reason for that is you want to identify challenges that are facing the world and the issues that you care about, and where there's commonality, so that you can find other people that care about the same issue. So you can find a community of like-minded people that have the same passion that you do. And there are a lot of different frameworks to think about issues that are facing the world. Right now, one that is really popular for good reason are the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you may want to connect the issue or issues that you care about with one of the UN SDGs to find a group of people that care about that, to also find resources and momentum. And so the second question is, how does that issue or those issues align with the most pressing challenges we face in the world? Then, as a third node, you want to reflect on how you want to grow and what you want to learn. So if I think back to the story of me going to Rwanda in 2008, before that trip, I'd never been, I'd done volunteer work, and I had also visited, a variety of countries, including the global South, but I'd never done frontline humanitarian work. And I really wanted to know what that was about. I did some grassroots fundraising, but part of the organization wanted us to do a needs assessment and draft like a case for support for fundraising. And those were all new things that I'd never experienced before. And of course, I wanted to go to Rwanda. I wanted to heed the call of, like, you're still failing us. So there was personal growth and learning for me. And we shouldn't shy away from that, because psychologists in the olden days, in the Freudian Lacanian days, said that there were 2 principal motivators of humanity. One was the fear of death and the drive for sex, right? But positive psychologists have studied what motivates us. And it turns out that we as human beings are motivated for service and motivated to learn and to grow. So it's still part of the purposeful empathy model does allow for you personally to learn and grow, and that you can strive for that. The final node is social progress, which is ultimately what we're looking for when we're engaged in purposeful empathy. And if you think about all of the social progress that has happened across the planet over time, whether it's the salt marches in India, or the apartheid movement, or Black Lives Matter, or the LGBTQ, any of the big social movements have required not only the people who are impacted by the injustice, but also allies to come together and engage in purposeful empathy and action on that to see social progress. So there, the fourth question that you want to reflect on is, what system or systems need to change, and what is my role? How am I going to step up and be part of the solution to the problem? Okay, so those are the 4 big circles of the model. And if you're engaging all 4, you're engaged in purposeful empathy. I'm going to layer onto that just a little bit, and then there'll be time for questions. So this is just bigger. I'm just going to point out quickly within the sort of like, intersection of two circles. When you're engaged in social progress on issues that you care about, it takes moral courage to step up. And, it also requires collective action, and it requires community engagement, and working on issues you care about, and seeking personal growth requires elevated consciousness. And when I look at all of those four pieces in green, I find that kind of very stirring and inspiring. That, yeah, that's the direction I want my life to move in. I want to have moral courage. I want to have an elevated consciousness. I want to engage with my community in collective action. So I find it aspirational. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that purposeful empathy exists when there are certain characteristics present. So the first is humility. And, social change work requires being humble, because we don't have all the answers. And we ought to listen to the people who are impacted by the problems, because they have the lived experience and could teach us what could be helpful to them. So humility is important. Flip side, of course, is in the face of social change and social progress, there's a need for tenacity. We, two steps forward, one step back. It's exhausting work, so we need to be tenacious. The other two elements are mutuality and reflexivity. Mutuality calls on us to realize that we're not in this work alone. We're in this work together, and we need each other to do this work. And so, mutual aid societies and solidarity, all those words of, collaboration and cooperation is embedded in that sense of mutuality. And then there's reflexivity, which is, thinking about what you are doing with your time, with your energy, with your money, how you're spending your money, who you're spending your time with, and what you're doing on social media. You have to be self-reflexive and recognize that either you are contributing to systems that are not sustainable or lack justice, or you're contributing to a more sustainable, peaceful, just world. And to be reflective of your behavior throughout the day, week, month, year. Lastly, in the model, I believe that purposeful empathy is political and spiritual by nature. So on the political front is the idea that we do not accept the status quo. We must strive for more peace, justice, equity, and sustainability. So let's, it's a call to action. And the spiritual element of purposeful empathy is that we are one. There's a sense of interdependence that we need to acknowledge. And the indigenous cultures really do a much better job than our modern cultures do, recognizing that there's interdependence across the world with nature and with one another. And I think the spiritual nature of purposeful empathy is that we kind of elevate to our best angels, the better angels of our nature, to do this work. So as a resume, these are the four questions that we've asked ourselves to date, but I want to tag on a fifth one. Purposeful empathy started with the issues you care about, and it never ends. Purposeful empathy requires ongoing self-compassion and self-care. I remember when I left Rwanda, in the summer of 2008, that was a transformative year or experience in my life. And I flew home via Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, and I had a long layover, and I got a pedicure. And for, I'd say, more than a decade, when I reflect on the decision to get a pedicure, I was haunted by shame. And I just thought, what on earth was wrong with me that I could do such a thing? And I've done a lot of reading about self-care and self-compassion in the meantime, and I've come to realize that actually I was offering myself a little chance to integrate some of what I had experienced, possibly some post-traumatic stress. And this was a chance for me to do a little TLC so that I could go home and continue doing good work. So I have forgiven myself for the pedicure. And that's what I mean by self-compassion and self-care. You can't do the work of purposeful empathy and social progress work without tending to yourself as well. So the question there is, how can I be kind to myself while practicing purposeful empathy? And so I hope this model is useful for you as a person, and that you might, think about it for your family to have a conversation around, your community, within your organization. You can get in touch with me 100 different ways. I want to thank you. And now I'm totally happy to answer questions, if there are any.
I will give people an opportunity to type their questions in the chat box, but I had a question and I need to figure out how to phrase it compassionately. I'm wondering if it is productive to try to practice empathy towards people who may not be a force for good in this world. And if it is productive, how do we do that?
I think there's real evil. Okay, so I'm not talking about real evil when I answer this question. When there's real evil in the world, it's very tough to empathize with people who are being terrible human beings and exploiting other people or hurting other people. If you're talking about sort of like ideological differences or political differences, then I think my reaction would be, I still remember the night that Trump was elected, and I'm a Canadian, and my daughter was only a few months old and I was nursing, and I woke up in the middle of the night to find out about the results, because I went to sleep not knowing, and I burst into tears nursing my daughter, thinking, I can't believe my daughter's born into a world with this man who's now the leader of the free world. And so yeah, I think there are it's very tough to empathize with people that you feel are just not kind. But I know work that's being done by the Center of Building a Culture of Empathy, Edwin Rutsch and a bunch of volunteers, where they actually bring people together in empathy circles for dialogue across difference. And the practice involves people speaking and then the listener reflecting back what they hear. And in the act of reflecting back, but not responding to or reacting to or judging, but just reflecting, just working on the reflecting back what you hear, the spirit of what you hear, that process that goes back and forth opens up a space for understanding that is not common enough in our culture. Social media makes it really tough. It's just easy to just hit yucky buttons and say nasty things, especially given the anonymity. So I believe that we must bend towards common ground, and we must bend towards having empathy for people we disagree with. So not an easy thing to do, but I think that's the way to go.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody else have questions? The chat box is open. We have a few more minutes. Okay, nothing yet. I had another one.
Okay.
Is there ever such a thing as too much empathy, in your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. And that last question about self-compassion and self-care kind of speaks to that. There's a phenomenon known as compassion fatigue or secondary trauma. And we certainly, saw it play out as nurses and frontline health workers who were dealing with COVID, that they were just exhausted physically, and it was just overwhelming what was going on. And there is an absolute need for us to have a chance to recharge our batteries and replenish our own resources so that we can continue being empathic and compassionate in the world. So there's also people that are sort of like energy vampires, and you know that because if you spend time with one friend and you feel completely uplifted and you're ready to attack your to-do list versus somebody else you spend time with and you're like, oh my God, they took the life out of me. and it doesn't matter the content of the conversation, it was just the energy that was present. You want to also limit that so that you aren't over empathizing with somebody that is just, sucking positive energy from your life.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see here. We have a massive amount of disengagement in our organizations. What can organizational leaders do to demonstrate more empathy with their people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of research that's now showing that more empathic leadership and more empathic cultures actually have better bottom lines, and a whole host of other kind of KPIs, if you want to call them that, around absenteeism. There's something I learned recently about called presenteeism, where people are actually physically present, but like not really, because they're somewhere else in their head and they're not working productively. So empathic cultures create more innovation, because there's more trust among the group and there's more chance for failure. And it just impacts the bottom line on so many levels. And we know it to be true. Like, I lived it. I remember a meeting in my organization where, classes had been shut down for 2 weeks. We'd all, like, it was ghost town in the city. And the agenda of the meeting just went on as if like nothing was going on. And I was stunned, like, why aren't we kind of checking in with each other? And so I remember doing a presentation to a bank recently, and I was asked the question, okay, now that we're all coming back to the office, what's one of the best ways in which we can show empathy for one another? And I said, and I wasn't being tongue in cheek, I was like, I think everybody needs to go out for a beer and socialize and be reminded that we're humans before employees. And so I think leaders and managers, it's never been more obvious that we actually need to tend to the whole person as opposed just to an employee. And when you do, that's when engagement and great collaboration among your employees.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question because it kind of tags on to the last one. I think Alice asks how to cooperate. We are all on little islands, probably.
Yeah, there's one practice that I have found particularly illuminating when it comes to collaboration, and that is to actually become better listeners. We have not been taught to listen well, and our brains don't help. So like when we're listening to somebody, we're usually kind of thinking about what they're saying and then finding how that has relevance to us, and we're preparing to answer. And when we're triggered by any emotion, as we're in a dialogue with somebody, we're really not listening to what they're saying at all. We are just ready to respond, and there's like heightened emotion going on. So whether you're in personal relationships or collaborating across the team, one of the best practices to grease the wheel is to become a better listener. So there are listening exercises that you can do. I talked about the empathy circle as one, but there's many others. To become a better listener will allow for greater collaboration to transpire. So that's my answer to that one. So you don't have to be on an island. Listen to others. Listen. My dad used to say, as I would go on a date some years ago, Anita, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion. And I think there's something to that.
Wow, I love that. That's great advice beyond the dating scene. Well, thank you so much, Anita. This was super informative and engaging and so in line with the Charter's work. And we are just thrilled to have our partnership with you. And thank you, everyone who showed up. Be on the lookout for an email with the recording link from me. And feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up thoughts or questions, mimi@charterforcompassion.org. Okay, until next time.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.